Welcome back to the Vandy 247 podcast, the first rapid reaction at Memorial Gym since the change. Here with Brandon Bigsby, I'm Joey Dwyer. Vanderbilt falls 76-64 to Mississippi State, the number 14 team in the country. Brandon, they trailed by 22 at one point in this game, shot 35% from the field, I think 19% from three. A lot of Vanderbilt's flaws were on display today. But I also don't think it's time to panic. I think that's a really good team, and a team that does that to a lot of people and does it worse to a lot of people. I don't look at this game as a game where you're panicking, like I said, or you're talking about poor program infrastructure. It's just a loss to a good team in a lot of ways. And I think we have not been there with Vanderbilt hoops in a couple of years. I thought the crowd was pretty good tonight. That's a place we haven't been in a couple of years with Vanderbilt hoops. But Brandon, tonight, ultimately, not enough shot making. And I think the resiliency was good, but the talent level, I think, was still not as comparable to Mississippi State as I necessarily thought it would be. And Jason Edwards playing through an injury in which Mark Byington said he probably shouldn't have played him, I think was another story as well. Vanderbilt just didn't have enough tonight. I thought Edwards was a reason for that as well. Brandon, ultimately, though, just not enough. Not the worst loss in the world, though. I think one that you're going to look back at and not necessarily scoff at.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways you can look at it. You can look at it in the way of, Vanderbilt lost this game by 12, and they had all the momentum with the crowd being here the way it was. Easily the best crowd, I'd say, since the 2023 NIT, Joe. I mean, Memorial Magic felt pretty existent in the building tonight, but I think there's also the aspect where you can look at it like that, or you can look at it as, Vanderbilt lost by 12 against the 14th ranked team in the country, and Jason Edwards was held scoreless. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways you can look at it. I mean, even outside Jason Edwards, really, obviously, his struggles and Mark Byington kind of saying that he probably shouldn't have played him. But, I mean, you just look at some of the other numbers. A.J. Hogarth, 7 for 15 with 5 turnovers. Devin McLaughlin, 2 for 5 from the field, 6 rebounds. M.J. Collins, 0 for 5. Jalen Carey, 3 for 9. Tyler Nickel, 2 for 8. I mean, really, one or two of those guys have slightly better nights. We could be talking about a completely different narrative. And that's a really good Mississippi State team, one that looks like could easily be a 3 or a 4 seed come March. And this doesn't really do a whole lot to Vanderbilt, I think, in a negative aspect. Obviously, some of the deficiencies that we knew were there with this team, we kind of saw. I don't think we saw anything overly new that we didn't really expect or surprised us, but I think you just kind of saw it was one of those matchups to where a lot of Vanderbilt's weaknesses lie, that is where Mississippi State's strengths tend to lie. So great defense, big size, a lot of length. Vanderbilt, they struggle a little bit on the offensive end. They have some moments where they can get a little discombobulated offensively, and they're the smallest team in the SEC that doesn't have a whole lot of physicality, or at least not a lot of depth in that area. So I don't think it's a crushing loss or one that any fan should panic about, but obviously one that you can also look back and say, maybe a couple of better nights here or there, the result could be different.
Yeah, I look at it as a game that was encouraging to me in a lot of ways, but ultimately, I think this program, even in year one, is past the moral victory stage of things. I do look at it kind of the same way Mark Byington looked at it, to where he was talking about Jason hadn't scored, and we were 3 for 21 from 3, but it was still a 5-point game, and I thought that was an interesting point as well. A lot of things have not gone right for this Vanderbilt team, and a lot of them didn't go right tonight. And they were still in the game. They still came back. I thought they could have got ran off the floor. I also don't think being down by 22 to an SEC team is an acceptable outcome, though. And I think you got to look at it in that lens, too. It's fun to look at it in the other lens, but also it's almost like the crowd, too, to where the student section was great. And we talked about it was loud. The crowd was involved in the game for the first time. Still a lot of empty seats throughout the rest of the gym. That's kind of what it looks like to me. I think the program is still a bit of a work in progress, and that's to be expected for year one, but I think that often got pushed to the side throughout the last couple of months because they hadn't lost a game like this, and now they lose it, and you kind of figure out that there are some deficiencies, but you also figure out they're way ahead of where they probably should be in year one, and I think the crowd indicated that tonight, and just about everything on the floor did too. They are ahead of where they should be, but also there's still a gap between them and a team like Mississippi State, and I think all of that was pretty clear to me tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing you kind of have to remember, where we live in a world where we want everything to kind of happen instantly, and we kind of can forget that this takes time. This is just game 15 of the Mark Byington era and game 15 with this group of players together. I mean, we've talked about all season. There are very few guys that have ever played together outside of one or two. So it's going to take time. You're going to have performances like this. And you have to remember, again, Mississippi State, the number 14 team in the country. They came in at 13-2 for a reason. They're seen as one of potentially the favorites to win the SEC, along with teams like Tennessee and Auburn and Kentucky. You could argue Mississippi State, it's right there with them, between them and Florida. So it's a game where some of the concerns I think that you had about this team kind of came to the forefront a little bit today. And, you know, you mentioned that the crowd, obviously the student section was great. Fans outside of that kind of here or there, but it takes time to get people to really believe in this thing again. This has been a program that hasn't been to a tournament since 2017. So it takes a lot of time when the programs kind of have, you know, the spirit beaten out of them a little bit, for lack of a better term, and that's kind of what Vanderbilt had to deal with. But I think that we saw what it can be at points tonight. When Vanderbilt got on that run and cut the lead down to 5 with 4 minutes left, Joey, the atmosphere in here was electric. I mean, you could kind of feel the floor shaking just a little bit, and the student section was really into it, and the crowd was predominantly Vanderbilt favored outside of really towards the end of the game when Mississippi State had it locked up and you saw a lot of Commodores fans start to leave. But overall, some positives I think you can take with a game that has more of a negative tone, and now you go up against the Missouri team that, you know, I think that Vanderbilt can feel like they've learned some things from this game about themselves despite that loss.
Yeah, another thing too, I got to give them slack for this because I wrote this before the game and I do believe it to be true. I think Mississippi State is a team to where if you were trying to build a blueprint of a team that could beat Vanderbilt and beat them pretty handily, you build it like Mississippi State's build it. They have good old guards, you don't turn it over. They have long athletes all over the floor. They offensive rebound, they defensive rebound, and their best player is one of the fastest players in the SEC. He's running circles around the court trying to get open shots, and Vanderbilt's best player has a leg injury. I think there's a lot to note in terms of the matchup as well, and a lot of, I hate to use this word, it's got some PTSD with some of the Stackhouse quotes after some mid-major losses, but there's some context to a loss like this that I think matters, and I think that in itself and just kind of the matchup matters as well. I do think that they've got to get better outings from some of their guys, though, and some of their guys who generally don't look outmatched, looked outmatched. Let them when Lockton was okay, he had 6 points, but I thought Mississippi State's bigs were better. I thought Mississippi State's wings were better. RJ Melendez, I thought, was the best player on the floor tonight. Hogard was good, but again, turned it over a little bit. Some of those I think are fine, though. Mark Byington talked about how he's willing to live with some of them. I think the hit ahead to carry maybe could have been avoided, or if that's a better pass, maybe Byington excuses it. But there are some guys on this team who I think proved they belong tonight, and I think Tyler Tanner was one of them. He was one of the stories of the night. Made a point to ask Grant Huffman about him. Man, Tanner is just proven he belongs. He still hasn't turned it over. 9 points. I thought he was a big part of the stretch that they had later on. Tyler Nickel, obviously, hit that huge shot. I think that's 4 or 5 games in a row for him in double figures. Obviously, they didn't get anything from Jason Edwards tonight, and I thought this was one of the worst games of his college career. He'd scored in double figures 41 straight games coming into tonight. Give him some slack, right? He's fine. He was banged up, and I wonder if he'll be on the injury report again heading into Saturday. But Brandon, some guys showed some things tonight. And you also saw that Vanderbilt doesn't have a Josh Hubbard on its roster. And Josh Hubbard wasn't even that great tonight, but they don't have the waves of high-level scores that other teams do. I think they have waves of depth. I don't think they necessarily have guys who, if Edwards has an off night, can consistently produce like they did on Saturday. That's kind of a word salad, but I'm going to leave it with you and see if you can clean up my mess. I think there was guys who were good, but also guys who you look at and think, wow, they're going to have a hard time at times with some of the guys they're going to see in this league.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because you mentioned Josh Hubbard. I mean, he's the guy that leads this team in scoring, Mississippi State, that is, with over 17 points per game. I mean, Joey, you look at just the stats. If you would have told Mark Byington and his team that you held Josh Hubbard to 9 points, 3 for 9 from the field in 33 minutes, and you out-rebounded Mississippi State by 2, you probably figure that Vanderbilt wins that game, right? I mean, when you just look at it in a vacuum, but again, Joey's got fans in the background, so excuse him.
He's mad we got the shares out.
But, you know, you look at that outside of the vacuum. I mean, again, guys that you need to step up really did struggle. You know, you mentioned Devin McLaughlin. Not a bad performance by any means, but nothing really that blows you away. I think you could definitely see him play a lot better. AJ Hogard, I mean, I think he played well during the last stretch of that second half. Kind of struggled outside of that before then. You talked about MJ Collins, you talked about Tyler Nickel. Those are two players I think have really got to step up for them over this next stretch, who've been kind of hit or miss, it feels like, at points. I mean, really, and I want to say this too, give Chris Jans and his staff a lot of credit too, because I thought something that changed the game. You talk about the Claudel Harris Jr. for 3 when Vanderbilt was only down by 5 and they ended up being down by 8 after that 3. The possession after that, Mississippi State immediately just hounded A.J. Hogarth. That was some sparky run for Vanderbilt. They got them back in the game. He had multiple big shots, raised some turnovers on the defensive end, and every time Hogarth got the ball, they double-teamed him, and it instantly led to a turnover, and Mississippi State was up by 10 just seconds later. So I think really for Vanderbilt, it's a matter of still this team, I think, is exactly who we thought they were coming in. Maybe not the result you wanted if you're a Vanderbilt fan. Mississippi State, I think, definitely did show some of the weaknesses that we knew, but I don't think they really exposed anything that we didn't know. And even with Jason Edwards being scoreless, Vanderbilt still only lost by 12. And I think that combined with some of the other guys who struggle from the field, you can take at least a little bit of solace in that, despite not being happy with the result or even being happy that you were down by 22 plus in the first place.
Yeah, I thought tonight showed some of the things that we already knew were flaws, but I don't think I necessarily learned anything that was terribly off-putting. I thought the shot making was really something to note at times that was negative, but other than that, I didn't look at this game as a game that changed my outlook of who this team is or what it can do. I think this was a game that would have been a bonus if they had won it. They didn't have to win a game like this. I think there's a lot of teams in this Mississippi State window that are good but beatable, and I think this is probably the worst matchup for Vanderbilt out of any of those teams, and that's something I note as well. I wonder what the status of Jason Edwards is over the next couple of days. I wonder how banged up he really is. But Brandon, again, I'll just leave it to you. I don't think this was the worst loss they've ever had. I also don't think it's a night that you leave feeling warm and fuzzy about what they can do. They've got to win some they shouldn't. We know that. But we know that they don't have to win every game that they shouldn't. And I don't think we should write them off because of a night like tonight, and I don't think anybody really should.
Yeah, and I will say this, Jason Edwards might have a future as a salesman after basketball, because Mark Bynes said after the game, he begged me to play, and he said he wanted to play, and he let him out there, and he regretted that, but nevertheless, it is going to be something to watch, especially with Missouri coming up. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Joey. I don't think that there's anything new really that we learned about Vanderbilt necessarily. You figured Mississippi State would be a tough matchup just in terms of you look at the teams and how they match up, the way Mississippi State plays, the way that roster is constructed. Comparing that to Vanderbilt, you knew this wasn't going to be an easy game to win. And again, this is a team that comes in ranked number 14 in the country. They just beat Memphis, who's 19 in the country, just a few weeks ago. So that shows you the caliber of this Bulldogs team. Again, I don't think I really saw anything overly off-putting. I think you're going to get better nights from a lot of these guys, like Nickel, like Collins, like McLaughlin. But you also have other guys that stepped up too. I think this was arguably Grant Huffman's best game as a Vanderbilt Commodore. 12 points, 4 for 5 from the field with 4 rebounds. Tyler Tanner, as you mentioned, phenomenal again as usual. Still has yet to turn the ball over this season.
Crazy.
So, and not only that, but Vanderbilt only got outscored by 1 point in the second half. So it was really that run in the last 5 minutes, I think, that really killed Vanderbilt. They allowed a 10-0 run. They were scoreless for 5 minutes. If you take that run out of the game, then maybe this thing is different. So I think there's a lot of different aspects to why Vanderbilt lost this game, the way Mississippi State is built, the way Vanderbilt shot the ball. And Mark Byington talked about, too, he felt like when they got down, he felt like there were a lot of guys that were pressing and kind of trying to do it themselves. And we've seen a little bit of that as well from Vanderbilt. And they have not been in a situation like that to where the momentum is all against them. They're down 15 or 20 points and they're trying to make up for it. That's still a team that is trying to learn who they are in those situations. They're still forming an identity game by game by game, and I think we saw them take a little bit of a step back towards that tonight, or take a step forward rather. They were able to come back late in the game, just too little too late, unfortunately. But again, I think just the status of Jason Edwards and maybe how much that injury is affecting him is something to watch. And if he is not able to go for a game or two, who's going to be that guy to step up? Because this is the first time we've seen Jason Edwards struggle to that extent. And, again, outside of Grant Huffman and A.J. Hogarth during that second half, just not a lot of offensive production really from this team.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was due to Mississippi State kind of taking away elements of what has made Vanderbilt so good to this point. You look at the rebounds. Mississippi State actually was out-rebounded by Vanderbilt, which is kind of nuts, but Vanderbilt with 13 second chance points, 11 points off turnovers. Every game they've had against a Power 5 team, they've had more than 15 points off turnovers. So Mississippi State almost made Vanderbilt play with its left hand a little bit tonight, and I think we learned that Vanderbilt's left hand is not as good as Michael Vick's, but I think we've learned that they probably won't have to play like that super often. I think there's going to be a lot of guards in the league that won't turn it over a ton, but I think we also learned that Vanderbilt does have some elements to where it can do those things somewhat consistently. This is the only game really that they've been the less fast, less strong, less physical team. There's been a couple, but this was the only one that it was really super noticeable to me, and I think that's a good sign for this team. There's going to be a couple more games where it's like that, but I think the SEC is so often made out as like you're playing Superman every night, and I don't think that's the reality. I think there's good teams just about every night, but teams who have flaws, and Vanderbilt's one of them. So, Brandon, I'll leave us there. We'll be back talking Saturday, but thank you guys for joining us. God bless, and I don't think it's time to panic, so go to work, go to school, and just think about flowers and roses instead of tonight. So thank you guys for watching. God bless, and we'll talk soon. Peace.